Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and I am on today with James Paterson. He is the VP of Sales and co-founder of Agrotech USA. James, thanks for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to having a conversation.
Going to be a good conversation, I believe. So talk to us though, to same question everybody gets at the onset, James. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
Well, initially when I read it, I misread it, and you said I thought it was international because I'm not from America, but actually we'll talk about it being intentional. And I thought that's why I was on the podcast to begin with. But no, I think, you know, intentional can have a number of meanings. For me, it actually probably aligns with, there's a jersey over my shoulder here. It's the All Blacks. So most successful sporting franchise in the history of the world, 75% win rate. And I
Wow.
was fortunate in my professional career to play with a number of those players. And there's one thing that kind of came out of that kind of relates back to being intentional for me. And it's this terminology. It's called sweeping the sheds. And what does sweeping the sheds means? It means that nobody's too big to do the small things that need to be done. So every action in a business, no matter how small, contributes to the larger goal. I think we're so goal focused sometimes. And from a leadership standpoint, we might sit up top, but realistically, it's the humility to be able to do the small things that make the biggest impact in reaching the larger goal. And I'll reference it with that terminology as it relates to the All Blacks. I remember being a young player in a locker room with guys that were idols of mine at the time. And that sweeping the sheds mentality is when we left the locker room, the biggest superstar there, even though it was somebody else's job to clean the shed after, was walking around picking up strapping tape off the floor, and they left that locker room immaculate. And that was probably one of the biggest learnings for me. And if I relate it back to being intentional, it's that there's nothing that's too small for anyone to do in a business, especially a leader.
Yeah. That's one of the better analogies that we've gotten on that one, James. I like it. I like it a lot. and we gotta clarify one thing for the American listeners listening in who may not know what the All Blacks is.
Yeah.
You've got a background professional rugby player,
Yeah.
right? So for those of you that don't know what the All Blacks are, that's what you watch. And I gotta admit, I mean, we need to get more of this on American TV. I was I had a long layover in LaGuardia here a few weeks ago, and there was a rugby game on the TV, and I don't have a TV in my house, so I don't watch a lot of extra sports anyway. But I'm
Yeah.
sitting there in the Sky Lounge at LaGuardia, and this thing comes on the TV, and I think it was like Ireland versus Italy, and this is the most entertaining sport on the planet, in my opinion, based on that one experience. I mean, this it's so much. It is nonstop action, like soccer, right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
with a lot, but crossed over with with American football,
Yeah.
and it just like it just goes. It's nonstop, and these guys are just crushing each other and moving this ball up and down the field. I mean, it's like it is something else to watch. So I have a deep respect for what you've done there.
It's a fun sport. And I think actually, it would be surprising, even in the States where it's not that big of a sport, you'd be surprised at how many times you run into people. It might be on an airplane or someone that has kind of a leadership background that actually had a background in rugby. I think as a sport, it is it's a good experience sports and trying to understand how it works, because in rugby, you may have the best player in the world, but because it's a flowing sport and
Mm-hmm.
it's always changing, yeah, you can plan for something, but there's an audible at every situation. And what it means is that you have to collectively rely on the entire team to
Mm-hmm.
get an outcome. It's less individual focused of a sport. So it's kind of
Yeah.
it's funny how many people I run across that are in leadership positions that have played rugby at some time in their life. And I don't know if that's coincidence at all, especially in this country where rugby is not that popular. So,
Right. Right. No, well, I love the reference to the All Blacks and did sweeping the sheds. I mean, just a great intentional way to think about it. It's been coming up in a lot of ways in a lot of books that I've been reading lately and podcasts listening to with my coach. Like what does excellence look like? What does it take? Right.
yeah.
And you have to be willing to leave that locker room looking immaculate, no matter if you're the best, most famous player in the world, like you stop and you pick up
Yep.
that little thing that's on the floor.
Yep.
So cool, man. What you're in a growing company. Agrotech USA has been you guys been taking off a little bit. Give us a little background on yourself, the company, what you guys do.
So our company was founded about 8 years ago. It's there's a father-son ownership group that started, and really we just wanted to target one thing in the industry based upon our prior backgrounds in the fertilizer business, was to talk about one of the big macronutrients that's used, phosphorus,
Mm-hmm.
as low efficiency, from a macronutrient standpoint, one of the lower efficiency products farmer adds. So there's a lot of opportunity to be gained if we can shift the efficiency of that product. It benefits the end user, but I think long term, from a sustainability standpoint and an environmental standpoint, it's something that really has a big future, especially if we can improve it, knowing it's a non-renewable resource, and eventually we're going to run out of it. So we developed some technology, did all the fun things for a startup. Put the product out there, failed I don't know how many times. We have a joke in the company. We gave everything code names all the way up, and it was product code names was BS in front of it, and we got up to BS 31 before we got a product that actually worked replicably in the market. And then from there, it was all about taking technology that would work and trying to scale it within the marketplace. So
Mm-hmm. Wow, very cool, very cool. Well, that's it's a great mission, great product, and love the work that you guys are doing over there. So good for you. As you try to scale up the business, what are you finding is important and or challenging in getting the right people on your team?
this is it's a challenging thing to think about, because when you talk about it, and I looked at one of the prompts to this, it was about talent retention. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Our challenge is probably not talent retention, it's talent acquisition at this stage, because there is quite a big stratification in the industry in the United States. Obviously, you've got large players. And so for us, you can validate the technology, but it's about getting the right people in an organization. So for us, it's actually about acquiring talent. Yeah. So like within a team, it's and maybe in a smaller business too, it's easier for us to keep people for one reason, because we kind of have this pass the ball mentality that no one's bigger than the team in this business, because we are a smaller group. And that allows us to kind of empower people within the teams to feel like they're a critical part of the company's success. So we can communicate to them. We share the same vision. We all share in the same wins. If you're part of a bigger company and a bigger team, that's something you have to look to try and create within an organization. I think naturally that happens in a group that we have. Our challenge is acquisition of talent, because inevitably it leads to the same conversation. Someone's heard about the product, they've experienced at the ground level, they've had someone that's really interested in it. We'll reach out, try and hire someone, and we can present a picture, we can provide references internally, we can have lots of interviews with them, and it leads to one question at the end of the day: is why would you want to go work for a startup when effectively you have the security of a billion-dollar company behind you? So right. That is our single biggest challenge to scale this company, is actually acquiring talent.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody struggles to acquire talent to some level, but it does obviously throw a new level of challenge into the mix when you think about going to that startup, which may be perceivably less stable or less advanced, or I mean, one of the big, I mean, as we're an unfunded, not even really a startup at this phase, but we're growing, so we're acting like a startup, right? And so, but we're not doing it with funding. We're not taking out a big loan to do this. We're not taking on investors. We're doing it on cash flow. Yep. And so you have to be very conservative about, adding people, so that, the constant question is like, okay, well, what's the right time? What's the right ratio of, revenue to, the number of people that you can support, and doing that in such a way. But you also have to be aggressive.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can't, because it's sort of like, well, I know that there's money in the pipeline to be released, but I don't have the time to go get it. So I need somebody else to go out there and get that for me. And so these are all the questions that intentional leaders have to wrestle with all the time. Right. It's like, well, when's the right time? What's the right territory? What's the right skill set? Do I take somebody who's maybe younger and then work to build them up, because, when they're younger, they have less bad habits, but they also don't have the existing network
Yeah, there's that. There is
Yeah.
that. Is that eternal debate? I think it is shifting a little bit in the industry. I've
Yep.
had some fun conversations, even with some of our more senior salespeople that have had backgrounds. We were sharing a beer and we're talking. I said, "Well, what do you think that customer relationship looks like in the future?" And if we're to hire someone tomorrow, always us internally in the business, who should we be targeting? Of course, there's a stratification there. The older people, what do they say? Will you hire on experience? And you hire on that. And I said, that's true. But look at the way the market's changing in agriculture right now. You
Mm.
have less farmers. Yeah. You have bigger farmers with more buying power, and information is more accessible than ever. And you have a generation of customers that has been groomed in my generation to want to make their buying decision for themselves based upon information that's accessible online, not being told what to do. In the past, with the co-op mentality, it was they went in there and they had trust in the one person, and that's where that trust relationship mattered, and that's where relationships mattered in the industry. Now
Yeah.
that things are kind of shaking up a little bit, it's kind of changing the person long term, and I think there's a crossover point. You've got to have experience, obviously.
Yeah.
That's key. You can build experience. Obviously, it's easier for us to build experience with people because we have a simple portfolio of products,
Mhm.
and they're easy to understand. But I think that's kind of the question that you look at. You like boil it down tomorrow and you say, who am I going to go hire? It's funny. Some of our best performing people are the least, I would say, from a standpoint on the surface, if you said we're going to go out and hire someone to achieve this, they probably are the complete opposite of what that person would have been on paper to begin with. So
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. You have to be adaptable. I mean, if we're going back to some rugby
yeah,
analogy here, right?
yeah, yep,
But
you have
the,
to.
the
You
game
have
is
to.
constantly in flow.
Yeah, you know where the end destination is going to be. It's like putting GPS in your map when you leave for somewhere. And I had a conversation with someone the other day about this. You know where the end destination is, and you know that it's going to give you 3 routes to get there. Yeah, and you're
Mm.
going to take that comfortable route every day. But it's having the courage in some instances, even when things are going really well, to take that alternative route that you may not have taken that day, because something would have happened along the way that would have made you learn something different about that experience. So
Yeah. Yep. I think there's a fair amount of intuition that goes into this as well, right? Because it is a bit of a new, like you guys are in a different industry. If you were launching this 15 years ago, it would have been a very
yeah,
different experience for you.
yes.
There is a lot of flux. There is a lot of change. There is there's a lot of different opportunities to be able to go out and capture market share today that maybe were previously dominated by bigger players only, or
Yep.
what have you. There's a much bigger flavor for that new company, smaller company, hungrier company. And I think some people are finding out that some of these large companies aren't quite as reliable and stable because they make change too. There's a couple that are making sweeping changes across the broad scope of their organizations right now that are freeing up probably some people you could go hire.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that goes back to like what we try and do in this business being small is, we don't have the budget, the huge marketing budget. So one of the things that I think that kind of lends itself to just in general, the employees' satisfaction in the business is the way we're able to build that intentional culture. So like, how do we build that intentional culture in our business? And it's through our collective character that we identify. So for us, we have an unwavering commitment to innovation. That's what we are. We're an innovative company that provides technology. So we have to embody resourcefulness, because we've got to be creative and efficient
Mm-hmm.
to be able to solve the needs of the customer. And we don't have the promotional budgets to do it. So we have this kind of chip on our shoulder mentality that
Yep.
at the end of the day, we know technology will validate itself with the end user. We can't force that buying decision. But when we bring people in and they share in that experience, and they, like all of the people we bring on board, once they get out there and they see the change this is making for their customers, they get even more encouragement. It becomes this perpetual motion where these guys believe in it so much because they believe in what it's doing for the end user. We have a team that's kind of all aligned in process, and it allows us to be much more transparent in communication, much more humble in situations too, because we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of all sharing in this journey together.
Yeah. There's something about being in that phase of a business that is exciting. You will attract a certain, excuse me, you'll attract a certain type of person,
Yeah.
right? Who gets excited about that. And if this is why I think intentional leadership is so important really in any company and anybody who's trying to build a team, but particularly in the startup culture, is like you have the ability now to determine what your culture is going to be, how it's going to flow, what it's going to look like. And you can, I tell people all the time, like, I don't care what culture you choose, but choose the culture and be that culture and create some polarity around it that would be very strict, if you will, on like, hey, this is what we are, and this is who we are, and this is who we're not. Right.
Yeah.
And if you're in the who we're not category and that resonates with you, that's fine. You go be with the who we're not. This is who we are. You want to be on this kind of a team. This is how we're going to roll.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll find those people want to come over.
And they do. And then that, as a result, now, as our team's growing, now we have people coming to us wanting to be part of it. So, but you just had to build that in the first place. It's getting over that first hurdle. It's that is the hurdle. And then internally, that hurdle then becomes, the biggest challenge that I've had is how do you align those individual aspirations, obviously, to the collective mission of the company. So, that's where you need to have that transparent communication with the team. You need to explain to people, but it's easier for us to do that, because their personal growth is directly attributed to the organizational success, and they're tied together on a much lower level than as opposed to if I was sitting here right now saying I manage 12 regions and 300 employees. It's much more easier to nurture that at the beginning and hopefully build something that's sustainable to move forward. So.
Yep. Love it. What else have you learned about culture building and team building along the way that you want to share? And a lot of people, we've kind of bled into this culture conversation a little bit already naturally, but what I find is a lot of people they give culture lip service, but they're not very intentional about creating it. So I'm curious what you guys are intentionally curating within that culture.
Again, it comes back to, I just share it back to my prior experience in sports, and what was successful for me. And I look at it from the leadership standpoint on the first end, because I was been part of very successful franchises and some that struggled. And honestly, the biggest thing for me was just, you have to have a sense of vulnerability at the top, all the way through the organization, because you need to foster this open and honest communication. It's so critical. It's even more critical in a small business, because if you're self-bootstrapping things and you have people in a business that, tell you what you want to hear, that can lead to a lot more problems in our business because of inventory control and the amount of capital we have to inject into product in a year. So from a business success standpoint, it kind of bleeds together with the culture. The culture part of it is being vulnerable. So like we build a team, and I hope this is the case. Yeah, we build a team that is, it's all about us working collectively towards something and sharing wins together and sharing losses so that we can learn. That's the biggest thing, is like, if you have a culture, we get everything's about high performance in this world. We always talk about high performance. And you join into a business in a sales force, everybody wants to perform. So we lead this kind of group of people that are all essentially providing lip service and telling people what they want to hear. That doesn't build a sustainable culture. Sustainable culture is you want those people to be able to feel like they can share their losses so that you can grow as a team. And then the whole team learns together. And then people don't make that mistake across the board. And then people feel like they can share with each other. I think that's the big thing. Like you can have a sales meeting with 5 guys. And I've often said this in the past, typically sales meetings where you get on Friday and everybody gets on the call trying to justify their existence for 45 minutes and nobody learns anything from it. So I said in a part of our sales meetings anymore, I said, I don't actually want to know anything that you guys are doing. You don't have to justify anything to me. You don't have to report to me. You don't have to tell me. What I want to do is I want to share in wins and losses together. And I want to talk openly about those situations where you felt like something didn't happen or it led to an outcome you didn't expect, but talk about it openly. And then we get this environment where people can actually share their losses, and we laugh and we joke about them and we learn from them. But that's part of the culture that I want to see, because that's where learning and growth comes from. It's not from everybody sitting there just trying to say, like, I visited 36 people this week. I did this, I did that, I did that. That kind of leads to an artificial culture of high performance that doesn't actually lead to individual growth.
we're talking about, getting to know like where are we at with guys when it comes to being in team meetings. What are you're trying to create this atmosphere about um that's not so important about like what are they doing day to day, but what's really important, right, in
Well, I
the
think it's just
conversation with them.
that culture question that we talked about and how you build it. And I said that sometimes, from our perspective, you get into this space that, and it related back to vulnerability. Yeah. So if it's open and out there about this, you can learn a lot more. What I found in the past is that when you do these sales calls, everybody just gets on there because, inherently you have this high performance mentality around the team. Everybody knows they're trying to justify their position by what they're doing. But at the end of the day, from a cultural aspect, in terms of getting buy-in and actually growing, you have this false sense of or you really don't have the reality of the situation. So we kind of switch things up internally, and I don't really. In fact, I ask them, I say, don't tell me what you've done at all. This isn't an accountability session. What I want to learn, or what we want to learn from the company, is explain some of the failures, explain the situations where things didn't work, and let's take a learning from it. And I think that kind of relates back to going back to professional sports again. One of the better franchises I was in is we had this thing that was called no woes. Yeah. No weaknesses, only work ons. And that's something that I like to say to the team is that, look, and I'm a big believer too, and this again comes from sports, is that you're in a position in your life and you have strengths that are there. I think we focus way too much on going after weaknesses rather than promoting strengths. And that's something that we've kind of tried to instill from the culture standpoint here at the company is, hey, you may be really good at this. And I know, yeah, you're 60 years old. You're probably never going to adopt this. So rather than spending all my time trying to focus on what I think we need to develop in you to make you more well-rounded, let's ride what you're best at. Because if we focus all of the attention on what they're best at, we get an outcome rather than focusing everything on, there's two mentalities. Yeah. It's like if you make a 1% change across everything collectively, you're making this big growth. But realistically, you want to focus on what they're best at. And you want to be very open, and we want to be very open as a team that I understand it's not your strong suit, and that's okay. Let's talk about situations where maybe that what you perceive as something you're not strong didn't have an outcome that was to your liking. And then let's learn as a team together on where we can plug and fill that void. So a guy may not be very competent. I'll give an example. We hire someone in an area and they feel really uncomfortable in a certain situation with a customer explaining something. So rather than spending all the time trying to change her, what we do is we pair her together with someone that's really comfortable, and her acknowledging that fact and bringing someone else in that has that strength. We've done two things. We've gotten a more favorable outcome, but she's actually learning without even thinking about it because she's present in that moment. So
Come on, man. You guys need to go back, rewind like a minute 45 and just pick up what James is laying down right here, because that was pure gold, man. Pure gold. And also, okay, no woes.
Yeah.
But no work-ons, just
no weaknesses, only work-ons. Yeah.
no weaknesses, only work-ons. No.
And I'm not even sure if the acronym even really goes there, but it was what our coach said. He would always come out and we'd have 15 minutes or 20 minutes before training, and that was your no woe period. So that's where you went out there, and again, it was really targeted around focusing on what you're good at rather than where you're weak. So like in sports, for example, you might be really good on offense and you might struggle defensively. But realistically, you're there for a reason. You're in that position because you're good at something. So you're better off focusing on what got you there and directing your energy towards something that you have an advantage of, because and in business, it's the same. At some point, you're going to reach a level where everybody deserves to be there. Yeah. And we get too focused on going back and looking at, look, how can I improve this? No, let's just keep trucking on why you're there, what your best attribute is. Let's figure out how to leverage that attribute to get more success for the business, but then personally too. It's a lot more rewarding to do that than sit there and have to dedicate a huge amount of time to something you don't like, you're not good at. It's very demoralizing. It's better to create culture around winning, and winning comes from promoting what you're good at.
Yeah, absolutely. We're aligned in that mindset. We actually have an assessment tool that we often use with clients called Strength Scope. And what Strength Scope, not to be confused with Strengths Finder, because they're similar in that they're both psychometric assessments, but Strength Scope specifically is showing us, we're looking at 24 potential strength areas, and specifically areas of the brain that light up when you're operating within that natural strength, because you're over the 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of life, you've had neural pathways built up in your brains. And the ones that are we say the synapses that fire together, wire together, right? And the more times that fire together, the more times that wire together, the stronger that bond, the stronger that neural pathway becomes. So for you, when you're doing certain things, you actually get almost more energy the more you do it.
Yeah.
Yet when you do other things, you get completely drained.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, the brain is using up a massive amount of energy.
Yeah.
And I mean, your brain on a daily basis, without doing anything abnormal or different, it's using 25% of your calories.
Wow.
Okay, that your body burns out. If you're burning, normal 2,000, 2,500 calories a day, 3,000 calories a day, your brain's using up a quarter of that just to keep everything right. So when we can identify, so what are those things, to give you an example, some people really love detail.
Yeah.
And I need a detail person on my team that really gets off on looking through the numbers, or how can we make that workbook look just a little bit better? How can we make that the room look a little bit better? And think about all the details that go into event planning.
Yeah.
Now, can I do that? Absolutely. But it takes me longer.
Yeah.
Leaves me feeling depleted when I'm done with it.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what do you want me to work on? You want me making decisions. Bring me 3 detailed explanations as to why, or like as to options. The team will bring me 3 hotel options. Hey, here's what's good about each one. Here's what's bad about each one. Here's the budget for each one. I sit down with that, and in 5 minutes, I'll have a decision.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because that lights me, like being able to just like evaluate data quickly and then make a call. Awesome, right? Or building relationships with other people. It's why making this podcast for me is so much fun, because I basically get to sit down, meet new people, and have a conversation. Well, relationship building is one of those well-worn neural pathways in my mind. So anyway, we run the assessment, and we're able to find out. And what's super unique is that everybody is so unique. What it gives us is the unique thumbprint for that individual, and then as a team, we can support that individual on how to keep them as engaged in their strengths as possible at work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, similar concept. Sometimes you can see it, but sometimes it's nice to get under the hood and see what's going on too.
Well, and it's cool to draw analogies from and that's why I think that it's one fortunate thing about my background in high performance sports is you realize that, and you're part of teams. I've been part of teams where we would sit there and all we would do is focus on weaknesses. So why did you do this? In this position, like you're not really good at doing something to the left and instead to the right. So then you go to training and you do it. And just in a mindset standpoint, just from doing that, you're immediately limiting yourself, and you're changing the way you look at things rather than look at an opportunity rather than seeing it as opportunity, you see it as a chance that you might not perform in that moment. Yeah. And immediately, mentally and cognitively, you're approaching every situation in your life differently. Yeah. And, that's one of the biggest learnings that I've had. And honestly, I wish that you could have, my fear of failure was just through the roof coming out of sports and into business, because, failure to me was absolute. Like, you have a bad game, you lose your position, someone comes in, your career's over, kind of a thing. And I wish that I really struggled in business afterwards, because every time someone said no to me, it was just so deflating. And then I went through this process, and I had I worked with some great people at the beginning. I think, John Vandergeesen, a friend of mine, I got into a situation with him where we just continued to fail and we learned together. And the learning that I got out of that, I wish I could go back and then apply that from a mental skills perspective back to my sporting career, because I would have been way more successful. I spent so much time under the fear of failure. Like my whole mindset was framed around, it was just framed the wrong way. And it's just simple wiring, the way you approach opportunities. And that's what I'm trying to do in the business. And that's what we try and do in this business is we try and you talk about being vulnerable. It's okay. There's going to be parts of you that aren't great. I'm not after a well-rounded individual in this business. It doesn't do anything for us. We want to take your strengths, make them stronger, because that's what's most beneficial to the team. And that was what makes you get up every day and feel enthusiastic about doing something.
Yeah. One thing I'd love for the listeners to pick up, and you guys that are hearing this while you're driving down the road or or walking on the treadmill this morning or whatever, you'd be thinking about what James is saying, right? What he's saying is absolutely on point for the business stage that his business is in, right? You don't need people that are that are coming in right now looking for that are maybe on a trajectory to become the next CEO, right? Or the next VP. Like we're coming in, we're at a stage of the business, we've got a job to do. And it's to get the business to the next stage. And I need the players to come on my team that can do that job and do those jobs really well. Now that may change down the road, and we may be able to use some of those same people to then start to move into some of those upward growth roles and things like that. But this is where we're at.
Yeah.
We can't hey, I need people to come on my team right now that can sell and that can coach.
Yep.
Those are the two things that I need, because that's the stage of the growth, that we're in. Now, someday I might need somebody to come in and be a better CEO than I can be, because maybe I don't know how to run $100 million company, but I think I can take it to 25.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we can get it, it's having that appropriate player. That's a very intentional. There's some really intentional statements that you're making, James, that I wanted people to really hone in on there.
Yeah.
So good. All right. As we bring this thing in for a landing, talk to us a little bit. You've been a professional athlete. You've been in those roles, those high performing roles. You talk about, some of that fear factor of getting it wrong and being in that, there's almost like a no room for error. The coaches that got it best for you, and this is not on my list, but it's on my mind because of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The coaches that you think did it really, really well, how did they manage those player personalities? Because I have to imagine you got some big egos.
Yeah.
Right.
So probably the direct delineation towards how I responded favorably was with a team where they really didn't do it. They put it on the players. So, and we talked about earlier, empower those people in the team. The best coaches weren't really coaching, if you know what I mean. They were empowering the players to coach each other and collectively make a decision. And we were all working towards the same goal with a lot more energy. The old school kind of, you go back to the old Bears in football or something like that. The old get on the line, punish you for making mistakes. You miss your tackle, you do something. That didn't do anything. In fact, it just limited the team. So when you talk about the best coaches that I've ever been around were the ones that empowered us to do it. Wow. And they gave us the ability to be able to do things and learn from our own mistakes rather than pointing them out. So I think that to me was the one thing that resonated across all the different coaches I'd had in my career. So
love it, man. What do you do now? Is there any of that physical acumen that came from the sport life into professional? What do you do to stay in shape, keep your productivity up?
It's a thing that's kind of centric to what I do. I'm not a big, so there's people that love to sit down and read books and, do that continual learning. My learning's all about it's around opportunity focus. So within an industry, I'm always looking at different things, reading articles, doing that kind of stuff, but I won't really sit down and read a book ever. It's a lot different to a lot of other people. My one constant, and that's about, in a business full of uncontrollables in the startup where it just seems like you're pivoting all the time and everything's out of your control. The only thing I can control every day is waking up every morning and going and working out. And if I do that, doesn't matter where I am in the world, I'll take the time physically to do that because it clears my head and puts me in the right headspace to approach the day. And I honestly, if I skip it and miss it, I'm missing upstairs. And so for me, it's just like it's about finding some type of a constant. And it doesn't have to be exercise. It could be, mindfulness. It could be something that you do that would allow you to have that same feeling and the same outcome from a situation. It's controllable. You do it, and then you approach the day with clarity. And that's, for me, that's why exercise is so important. So
Beautiful, man. I love it. It's a super essential thing for me as well. I love going to last couple months started getting into CrossFit. In the past I've done Muay Thai. What I like about going to something obviously early, like you said, right? You get that you're just clear. There's more capacity. There's more of you to go around, handle the challenges of the day. I like going to a workout now that's guided, like CrossFit, or once a week I would go to a a Muay Thai training with an instructor who would just tell me what to do.
yeah,
And in your world and my world, you're on all day, right? 14 to 18 hours a day, probably making decisions, supporting everybody, doing all the things, and it rides on your shoulders as a leader.
yeah,
When you go to a workout like that, you're being told what to do. It's the
yeah,
only place in the world I can go where everybody else isn't depending on me, right? I'm being
yeah,
told what to do. And like yesterday it was whatever, 15 thrusters and 15 pull-ups and 10 pull-up or 10 thrusters and 10 pull-ups and 5 thrusters and 5 pull-ups, 2 minute
yeah.
break, do it again. It was just
You're right. I mean, it's probably the second only place I get told what to do, apart from when I come home and my wife has a laundry list of items for me. But
yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Good stuff. All right. Any other podcast resources, books that you'd recommend to the group before we shut it down?
like I know I referenced the All Blacks. There's a really good book by James Kerr called Legacy. So I'd recommend reading it. It's cool. It takes, some learnings behind, the most successful sporting franchise in the history of the world. And it talks about things differently. I think, for me, like it's kind of like practice. I was around these people and it really allowed me to approach things differently. And I think maybe the book will give some learnings to people that will make them think slightly differently about situations. So, yeah.
Good stuff, man. James, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for persisting through our power outage and rolling with it, which is funny because we talked all about that at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, exactly.
Good stuff, man. Thanks for being in.
All right. Appreciate it, mate.